Hello, I'm Stefan Greba, and today I'd like to go over Incus 0.2. So, as the name implies, Incus 0.2 is the second release of Incus, and it's a bit more interesting, I think, than 0.1. With the initial release of Incus, our focus was really on making the project work and import all the changes from LXD up to that point. Obviously, with this release, we've kind of done the same thing, and Incus 0.2 includes all of the changes of LXD 519. But instead of just being a fork with very few changes, this one actually introduces some new features and some things that you're not currently seeing on the LXD side. So this is the release announcement. I'm just going to go over some of the features really quickly and then go into more depth and do a bit of demos on a bunch of those. The first feature that was added is NVMe storage support for virtual machines. So for those who've looked kind of behind the scenes on how virtual machines have been working so far, all of the storage has always been using Virtio SCSI. So effectively, a paravirtualized SCSI bus that the disks are attached to. That works pretty well, but we've recently had the need to do some NVMe-related development and testing, and it made sense to add support for that in Incus directly. So there's a new config key now that you can set on disk devices when using virtual machines. It's called io.bus, and default value is Virtio SCSI, but it can now be set to NVMe, at which point the drive just shows up on the NVMe bus inside of the VM instead of Virtio. The next feature is a bunch of improvements to the LXD to Incus tool. The highlight is cluster support, which was the biggest thing we were missing in Incus 0.1. So now we're able to actually migrate all the data and everything from a LXD cluster over to an Incus cluster, effectively unblocking just about anyone from moving to Incus. On top of that, we've also added some more checks around whether all of the storage tools are properly installed on the machines. We've added support for LXD 519 as a source release. We've been adding a bunch of additional checks and workarounds for a number of situations in the tool, so that it should work for the vast majority of people. And it's obviously something that every time we see it fail for someone, we'll just go and improve it. Then we've added a new image for Nexus to the image server recently. And the current Nix images don't really work inside of privileged containers. And that caused us to add a new requirement key that can be set on images to disable the use of an image in this case, on privileged containers. So that's what we can see here with that Incus launch that fails when trying to create a Nix container using privileged mode. And the last feature, that one actually came from LXD, so that's not something that we introduced ourselves, is server-side custom volume copy. So that's particularly useful in clustered environments where up until now, if you wanted to copy a custom volume from one system to another or across pools, it would effectively be relayed through the client, effectively using the exact same code path as if it was being handled like between two completely standalone systems. That's obviously quite wasteful and slow, so now there's support through the API to just do it server-side, which is far faster. This one we won't even demo simply because it's completely transparent to the client. There's really nothing for you to do to use this other than just use your normal commands as usual. And if the server supports the feature, it will just seamlessly use it. And then we've also started now adding static binaries for ARM systems. So for those not familiar, if you go, let's see if I've got the right repo open. I don't. If we go look at the Incus repo and you go to releases and open the latest one, so 0.2 in this case, you'll see that we attach a bunch of assets to them. So there's obviously the release tarballs themselves, that's the source code, but then we've got static binaries for both the command line client, so the Incus command itself, as well as for some tools like the Incus migrate tool to import images, to import systems into instances. So up until now, we were only building on Intel. Now we're building on both Intel and ARM, which can be quite useful, I suspect, for especially on the macOS side, where Apple Silicon is now very, very common, is ARM64. So this is now available. We've also done a number of improvements to the documentation to really kind of make things much easier for folks to get started. So that includes, especially the getting started guide has been seeing a few updates with like where to get the packages, how to get things going, but also there's now a page, wrong one. There's now a full page on how to import or how to migrate from LXD over to Incus. So that's kind of the main improvements on the documentation side of things. All right. So with that done, let's take a closer look at those features. And we'll start with the NVMe storage. So let me switch over to a terminal here. There we go. And we'll just go ahead and launch an instance. So let's do Ubuntu 22.04 as a new VM and go. Oops, already used that name somewhere else apparently. Is V2 also used? No, V2 is fine. Cool. That probably failed to start. Yeah, let's me just delete V1 then. Come on, go away. There you go. So V2, it's now starting up and it's running. So if we go in there and we look at the block devices, we can see that the disk is on the SCSI bus. So that's kind of the expected behavior at that point. Now let's just create an additional disk just to play with that. So we're going to do create default, call foo, size of say 10 gigs, and we want it to be a block disk so that we can be attaching to a VM. Then we add that. So v2 foo, it's a disk, the pool is default, and the volume is foo. Okay, and again, just start the VM, and at that point we should see two disks both attached to the SCSI bus. So it's going to take a few seconds. There we go. And sure enough, SDA and SDB. Cool. All right. One thing that's interesting is that we can actually do hot plug, hot remove of a disk in Incus. So let's just do that. I'm gonna yank the config device remove. We just yank the disk out. There we go. We go look, it's gone. And now let's put it back in, but we're going to be adding io.bus equals NVMe. And now if we look, it shows up as an NVMe device. So that just shows how to do it with an additional disk. Now if we shut down the VM and change its root disk, so doing an override on its root disk and set the bus to NVMe, and start it back up. So in this case, the VM will actually fully boot from NVMe. So it's going through the bootloader and it's gonna try and boot through NVMe. I actually suspect that this is gonna fail. And the reason is that most of our images, they expect to be on Virtual SCSI, and so they come with a bootloader config that expects it as well. This is effectively gonna lead to getting into an initramfs prompt in a few seconds, most likely. Or I can just give up, stop the VM and fix it. Let's do that. So I'm gonna stop the VM, revert it back to Virtual SCSI, so we can actually set the property itself to Virtual SCSI. Then start the VM back up. So this time it should boot just fine. There shouldn't be any problem there. So see the logo, and then we should see, there we go. So the VM booted properly. Now what you need to do to fix it, and I can show you what the problem is. The kernel was booted here with root equals devsda2. That won't exist as soon as you move it to NVMe. So the trick is simply to regenerate the grub config, which is gonna change the VM from using the dev.sda name to using the partition UUID instead. So I just did a reboot so we can see that. But if I go back here, and now we see we're booting with root UUID something. That UUID doesn't change based on what bus we're on, so it means we can shut down the VM again, and we can go and set it to NVMe this time, then start it back, and watch it boot. And now, because the bootloader is not looking for a SCSI device, but it's just looking for specific partition, it works just fine. So just something to be aware of. NVMe works out of the box just fine for any additional drive you're attaching, but if you want to change the VM's root disk itself, then you do need to take some extra actions. In any case, now we can see that both disks are connected to the NVMe bus. All right. So let's shut that one down. And then the next thing on the release list was the cluster support for migration. So I'm going to do two demos there. I'm going to first do a standalone system to just show how things behave. If you're just moving from LXD over to Incus. So in this case, I do have a system running LXD 519 with a couple of containers. Incus is currently not installed. So we're just going to go and look at my package repository here and just copy paste the instructions. So the first thing we need is we need curl, which is probably not installed by default. So let's fix that. Okay. Then with curl, we can grab the keyring and then add the stable repository. There we go. Update that. And then go ahead and install Incus. We don't need any of the recommended packages, so let's save ourselves some that. There we go. Oops. Okay. So just installing that. Here we go. So now we've got both Incus and LXD installed. And so we can run the built-in LXD to Incus command. There we go. It shows us the source and target version, does a quick check that all the config is compatible. And if it is, it asks whether I want to continue with the migration. So let's do that. So target server is now starting, and just gonna validate that everything looks good, it's fine, and it offers to remove the LXD package entirely. Okay. And here we are. So it just stopped the instances, moved all the data, started them back up, and we're all, like, everything is up and running on Incus. So that's good, that's a standalone system. That worked already in 0.1, but that works a bit better now. That's fine. Now for the more interesting case, I do have 3 more instances, and they're called migrate 01, 02, 03. So that's a cluster. So do 01, 02, and 03. Give them a few seconds to boot up. Okay. So now in here, I can probably need to wait a tiny bit for the cluster to boot up, but there should be a LXD cluster of 3 machines. There we go. It's currently not online. It's fixing itself in a few seconds as the other machines boot up. There we go. Everything's online. Cool. Let me just show you that. All right, so that's a cluster. It's got 3 systems in it. It's got 2 instances per machine as well, just for good measure. And so let's go ahead and run LXD to Incus. Incus is already installed on the machine, so we see same thing. Source release is 519, target release is 0.2. It does show that a cluster environment was detected. There will be needed some manual action needed on each of the servers. And prior to doing any of that, it actually makes sure that every one of the servers in the cluster are up and running and in online fully functional state. Because otherwise things are going to go south very quickly. So once you're ready, do yes, and it's going to go and shut down all the instances on all of the servers one by one, so that no instance is left running. And once it's done, it then proceeds with the migration of the first server. So this one, which it has, it's now done. So it stopped it, moved the data, very similar to the individual migration. And now it tells us to run LXD to Incus cluster member on each of the other servers. So let's copy paste that. And we're gonna go exec incus migrate 02. So on this one, let's run the command. And then on the last one, let's do that too. Incus, oops, typo, migrate. Okay, and run the command there too. So now we can tell it that, yeah, we've run the command on all of them. And it's just gonna wait for those two other systems to be done with their data migration. So it effectively just looks for them to reconnect to the database and then for their status to be online and fully consistent again. So we can say that they're now all waiting effectively for that state to be good. It actually does it in chunks of 30 seconds. So every 30 seconds it checks whether everything is done, because clusters could be quite large. So we see now that one of them has completed, asks if we want to remove the package. Okay, can go and do that. The initial one is also good to go, so let's do that. And now the last one has also detected that everything is good. So with that, LXD is now being removed on all three. And if we look at the first one, the cluster is fully operational and all instances are now running. So it works as expected. It effectively handles all of the data migration and everything across a cluster. Obviously, the downtime to be expected in this case is quite a bit longer than an individual system, because nothing can really start back until the entirety of the cluster has migrated. So if we're dealing with very large clusters, this can take quite a while, and you should plan your maintenance windows accordingly. All right, and going back here, the next one is the new image requirement. So it's only present on a single image, so I can effectively show this the same thing as here. If I go there, let's just launch images next auth and just call it next. So this is going to be an unprivileged container. That works perfectly fine. And if we do next priv and do privileged true, this fails, saying that the image is incompatible with privileged containers and that you need to unset security privileged on the instance. So the instance has been created, so the steps are correct, that you can do an unset on it. So I could go unset security privileged and then start the instance, and that would work. So if we look, we now have both of them running. I can go in there and that works perfectly fine. Okay, and that's it. As I mentioned, the last one is completely transparent to the user, so there's not much you can really show. It just ends up being faster and less wasteful, which is always very good to know. I did show the new binaries, so those you can go see. Documentation, the link is there. And that's pretty much it. There's one thing that's kind of new on my side. So with Incus 0.2, I feel a lot more comfortable with actually professionally supporting people using Incus. So I've made available a page now with a list of paid services for anyone who wants that, which includes things like business type support, consulting for things like single system migration, cluster migration, review of all configuration on a system, but also trainings on Incus, either remotely or in person, and custom engineering. So there's a page with all the details. It's going to be linked down below for anyone who wants that. And as always, if you just want to say thanks for the work and help all of this happen, there's a bunch of different ways where you can support this work, either through GitHub sponsors, Patreon, or Ko-fi. And that's it for this release. Thanks a lot for watching. I hope you gave Incus a try. As usual, you can also just click on this and get straight to an online demo, which will also get you Incus 0.2 immediately there. So if we look, you get Incus 0.2 and you can poke around for a bit online before you install it on your own systems. If you've got any questions, feel free to leave them down below in the comment section, or you can go on our community forum and chat with our community there. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.